Good morning and welcome to Sunday Supplement. These are unprecedented times for sport across the world. We'll be discussing how coronavirus has affected football and where the game goes from here. Have the right decisions been made by the right people at the right time? Will the 2019-20 season ever be completed in its entirety? And what are the potential ramifications, both financially and for the individuals involved? Also on the show, we'll discuss the manner of Liverpool's exit from the Champions League and Phil Neville's future as England women's manager. Joining us to discuss all of that is David Maddock, who's the Northern football correspondent of The Mirror, Martin Samuel, chief sports writer of The Mail, Alison Rudd, sports writer for The Times, and Rob Harris, global sports correspondent of Associated Press. And don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup, and the best will appear at the bottom of your screen throughout the show. Now, as you can imagine, the newspapers this morning are just a teensy little bit lighter than usual, without all the usual football supplements and sports supplements, but there are still a lot of issues to be debated, of course, as you would expect. Actually, the Mail's gone with a big non-football story in issues with Tyson Fury. Very big exclusive story there. Euros off as the FA face a £20 million loss. And on the inside of the Mail, they're talking about the various options, 4 of them they put to us, about how and whether the Premier League, Football League, etc. seasons should be completed. Inevitably, it's not going to suit everybody. The Mirror have gutted Van Dijk of Liverpool's despair at the prospect of the fans missing the Premier League title party. They waited all this time. The Observer has a big piece by Jonathan Liew in there as the enormous industrial complex of global sport clanks to a terrifying halt. It's only natural to feel shocked, concussed, and even a touch bereft. So it's about how we feel about the fact there isn't so much live sport to watch. There still is a little bit, by the way. Rugby league, rugby union, some matches. Mexico is still going, by the way, with the football and elsewhere as well. Focus on non-league football this weekend, which has been played. Should it have been played? That's a question as well. A lot of non-league managers really unhappy about the fact that it's been going ahead. At the bottom here, they say exclusive winter Euros, an idea to enable the Premier League to finish. Of course, the Euros are supposed to be in the summer. What on earth happens there? They're expected perhaps to be postponed, but of course, huge knock-on effects there. And in the Sunday Times, big column, new columnist Wayne Rooney is absolutely furious with the authorities and the government for the timing of their decisions, feels that it should have happened a lot earlier, and it shouldn't really have been Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, contracting coronavirus to actually spark the end of the postponement of football. It is only postponement until April the 3rd. As things stand, so Rob, this is something that you've been beavering away with all week. Just go through for us the process of how we've reached this point.
I mean, it's been a week like no other, really. We've been told by the Prime Minister to prepare for much uncertainty in the weeks and months ahead, to prepare for the loss of loved ones. Society could be really closing down in part. And against the backdrop of that is what happens to the things we love, sport. So usually the distraction from everyday life, from the things that go wrong, from the gloom. Now even that is obviously gradually closing down. I mean, we couldn't really imagine at the start of the week we would end up perhaps in a position where the Premier League would be completely off. We thought maybe it would go behind closed doors first, but I think as the situation has escalated through the week, with the World Health Organization declaring this to be a pandemic, then them saying that Europe is at the epicentre, we've seen a really swift reaction from sports bodies, particularly in football. UEFA were determined still at the start of the week to try to press ahead with Euro 2020. It emerged then by Thursday that it really seems it can't take place and they're going to have to rearrange the tournament. It's going to be postponed, a huge decision. And then we've seen leagues gradually shut down as Italy and Spain and other countries and France have gone into lockdown themselves. And now we enter a time when we won't have sports there around us, and there's no certainty when it will return. We're told by the Premier League at a minimum the start of April, but it looks very unlikely that we will be in a position, I think, to resume football then. And now is the waiting game all round.
A quote from Wayne Rooney in his column in The Times today. He says, "I know how I feel if any of my family get infected through me because I've had to play when it's not safe and they get seriously ill, I'd have to think hard about ever playing again. I would never forgive the authorities." Do you understand that criticism?
I do understand, and there is so much uncertainty, and I think people who are making these decisions are almost as in the dark as we are. I was at Anfield on Wednesday night for the Madrid game, and there were more than 3,000 Atletico Madrid fans there, and yet they were banned from going into their own stadium in Spain, banned from travelling in Spain, and in fact, soon after Wednesday night, there were restrictions on any travel in Spain at all, and yet they were allowed to come over. I actually, after that game, I went home, turned on the TV, and there was Professor John Ashton, who was on Newsnight, and he said, and I'd literally just come in from that game, and he said there are thousands of Madrid fans in Liverpool, and I can guarantee this guy is the head of the Faculty of Public Health, or he was, and he said I can guarantee some will have the virus, and they are now spreading the virus in Liverpool. That's what this expert said, and I just got back from that game, and I could not believe that could have happened. The problem is, it's a situation that's obviously unprecedented, and even the people who are making decisions just simply don't have enough information, or didn't have enough information, and they acted slowly. Our government acted very slowly, and eventually it took Mikel Arteta and the Everton player and the Chelsea player to get the virus to make a unilateral decision, because the government themselves have still not said that sporting events can't go ahead. So, yeah, I understand exactly why Wayne Rooney feels like that. I felt like that when I got back from the game on Wednesday night. I was in a room full of Madrid journalists, full of them, and many were coughing. Martin was there too, and you almost get paranoid yourself. It was a really difficult situation.
I mean, the key thing is probably the fact actually the Premier League and others were just following government advice. So while the rest of Europe was putting sport behind closed doors, since the government was telling the Premier League and all the sports you could continue, then they went ahead with it. Obviously, until 9:30 on Thursday night, that was the position.
And the Spanish government advice was do not travel, do not play games. Because the British government that advice wasn't there, the Atletico Madrid fans were allowed to be in Liverpool. It was an insane situation.
You had the situation of Nuno, the Wolves manager, being absolutely fuming, even in his pre-match interview on Thursday night in Athens at Olympiacos, saying it's absurd we're playing this match. It was behind closed doors, and sure enough, the next day it got called off for now. But I spoke to various senior people at governing bodies yesterday who all said we were just following what the government was telling us. It wasn't up to us to jump the gun and to say we're cancelling football when the government's saying carry on, because they're being advised by the medical advisors. Where do you stand on that?
Well, Wayne Rooney also says in his column that he and his teammates were all watching TV, waiting for Boris Johnson to speak, which staggered me in a way. You don't sort of picture footballers tuning into political channels and wanting to know the latest news, but they were all waiting. They felt it would come from the very top at this country what their livelihoods were going to be for their families, for the fans, and everyone. And he says in his piece that they listen. They thought, oh, Boris Johnson has bottled it. He's just left it to the football authorities to solve the issue. And they probably themselves felt the same way. Oh, now we have to start thinking about the way virus spreads and herd immunity and things, you know, when you're putting together the league system, you don't have to think about these things. That should come from scientists and government. It shouldn't have to come from the football authorities.
But Boris Johnson was only taking the advice of the people he was flanked by, which are very senior people, scientific chiefs, medical chiefs. Why would he jump the gun and say, I'm not listening to you?
A lack of lateral thinking. Because I know we're speaking from hindsight, but given what we'd already seen from around Europe, it just felt maybe the people involved in football and the general public and footballers and everybody involved would have just felt safer if there'd been something a bit more stringent and far-sighted rather than, well, it's up, you know, you can play football if you want to. You can have fans travelling in from abroad if you want to. It just felt a bit too relaxed for the times. And yet, in a way, when we look back, in years to come, when we look back, you know, the name Mikel Arteta will be a big name in history, because if he hadn't contracted the virus, then we might have waited another 4 days, 5 days, I don't know.
And Callum Hudson-Odoi, of course, at Chelsea as well. I mean, Martin, perhaps the government might say, or the authorities would say, there's more than one way to tackle this. And it's not so much that in this country we're being behind the curve of what they're doing correctly in Europe, more that their scientific evidence and their strategy is that they're trying to tackle it differently with the whole herd immunity situation and just trying to get a better outcome in a way that they see fit rather than actually just being behind.
Well, herd immunity is increasingly discredited as a way of dealing with this. Herd immunity works at like levels of 95%. If you're talking about 60% herd, they think will be successful as a herd immunity. If everyone gets it, then more people become immune. Then the disease can't travel the way it has done. If you're talking about 60% of the country getting it, you're still talking about 40,000 dead people. So, you know, if you want to buy into herd immunity, what you're doing is you're saying, well, we're prepared to lose 40,000 people to this disease, and then we'll, you know, we might have cracked it. Because the thing with herd immunity is nobody knows what the immunity to coronavirus is. They don't know. They think you can't get it. They think you can't get it, say, 2 weeks later, but they don't know that for certain. They don't know if it's going to be something where you're immune for life. They don't know whether it's something where you could get it next year. They don't know if the disease is going to mutate, and if the disease mutates, are you then vulnerable to it again? Because most diseases mutate. That's why you have a different strain of flu every year. So herd immunity, and a lot of what is being talked about, it's just guesswork, and it's guesswork everywhere. And football always becomes this sort of the microcosm of society, and everything's seen through this prism of football. So the stadiums, what about the stadiums? As Dave said, the most dangerous place in Anfield the other night was not actually out in the open. The most dangerous place is in, say, the media section, is in any section where the two communities are now together in an enclosed space. So on the concourses, it's far more dangerous than actually out in the open air. That's why they were so worried about going behind closed doors and everyone piling into the pub, because the pub is a far more dangerous place in terms of the contracting coronavirus than a football stadium. But everyone's guessing. Everyone's guessing because they don't know how this disease travels. They don't know, you know, how long it travels. They know what you can get it from, and they know the symptoms, and they know this and that, but they don't know the real specifics in terms of controlling it. So I can understand what Wayne is saying. I completely get what Wayne is saying. But sitting there expecting somebody to stand up and say, right, well, it's this, and this, we do this, and this, and then it's all sorted, but that's not going to happen. And that's not going to happen for months, maybe years. You
wrote about wanting games to be played behind closed doors earlier in the week.
Early in the week, and then the situation had changed, Jacqui, within 12 hours, 24 hours. I mean, that piece that went in that day, the following day, by midday, it was out of date, because by midday the following day, when the clubs were coming in and saying, we've got players that have got it, behind closed doors only works if football didn't have coronavirus. Once football's got coronavirus, well, you can't play. That's how fast it's moving.
Yeah, because there's the theory that you look at Italy and go, well, they've closed down, we should do that, and that could be us in 2 weeks' time. But then the experts are suggesting that if you all do that, you just suppress it for a bit, and then you're bringing out this virus with so many desperately ill people after that, and then the NHS wouldn't be able to cope. So, I mean, there is science behind the strategy. It's easy for us as football journalists to go, oh, we should call football off, or they should do this. But they're not just making up decisions on the hoof, are they? There's a reason for what they're saying, scientifically.
Yeah, and they're also arguing that we might actually get bored, basically, by being isolating too soon and going into lockdown. But certainly, you know, Boris Johnson's turned the role of interviewer, actually, at times. He interviewed one of the medical experts himself in Downing Street on Wednesday, and she was making the point, actually, you don't really spread viruses in big open-air stadiums, but that position did contrast with what other key European countries were saying. You saw at PSG on Wednesday night, even though they played the game behind closed doors, you had thousands, it seemed, of PSG fans gathering outside, all on top of each other, celebrating that win over Dortmund. So that just shows the challenge of putting games behind closed doors. But the other point is actually it strains the resources of the emergency services as well and the public health authorities if you are continuing to play sport. And what we are being told is that the NHS is going to be overloaded in the coming weeks and months. We're not expecting this peak to happen maybe until May, even into June. So we've got many more weeks of escalating number of cases before we can even reach the peak. And then there won't be a very clear point, it seems, when we can say this is over or things are healthy to return to normal. There's not going to be a clear endpoint, a mission accomplished necessarily within coming months. There is no vaccine yet. It takes time to develop. And I know we're all trying to sort of sound like medical experts. We're just interpreting, obviously, what we're hearing from, across the world. But it is a period of uncertainty that it's very hard to determine the end game or, when necessarily there will be a sense of normality resuming, especially as we look ahead to things like the Olympics that is still due to take place in July.
The thing for me is that what appears to be clear is that most experts and most politicians are suggesting that up to 70% of populations are going to get this virus. And so clearly, if that's the case, then you need to slow the rate of transmission because none of us have to be experts to know that if everybody gets it at the same time, then the hospitals become overwhelmed, as has happened in Italy, and people are dying in Italy because there are too many people ill at the same time. So you have to slow it. And obviously, one of the ways of slowing it is by social distancing. That's clear. You were talking about PSG, and in France there was they played games behind closed doors, and yet Paris-Nice, the cycling race, was going on this week, and they started in Paris, obviously, and they went through the first stage was through the suburbs of Paris, where there was a major outbreak, and there were thousands and thousands of people out on the streets watching and at the finish line, and then they travelled down the whole length of France, and they finished on Saturday, when on Saturday the French government said no cinemas open, no shops open, no bars. They closed everything. And yet they'd allow this race with thousands of people travelling and thousands of people. So the governments are confused, but the bottom line is that if 70% of the population are going to get it, which appears to be the case, Angela Merkel came out and said that, then you need to slow it because you can't have all those people going into the health services ill at the same time because many more people will die.
And what they're trying to do, and the great fear, is that, and people say, it doesn't matter, the economy doesn't matter because, lives are at stake and lives are at stake if the economy crashes because poverty kills. If you cannot afford shelter, if you cannot afford medicine, if your living conditions are substandard, poverty kills as surely as any virus. And what they are desperately trying to avoid is sending the West into an unprecedented global recession, which is why, if you're looking at places where you could get coronavirus, get on a London tube train at 5 o'clock in the evening or whatever, and you're there, and the next person's there, and but they're not saying to people no public transport, no, because they're terrified that the economy falls off a cliff. Not just ours, but globally, America's economy, and America have bypassed. I can't believe this is true, but America appeared to be fast-tracking a vaccine so quickly. They're sort of bypassing the rats stage. They're bypassing. It's going straight into testing on humans and stuff because they're desperately trying. That's how panicked everyone is.
OK, well, that's it for part one. But when we come back in part two in a moment, we'll continue the debate about the potential ramifications of this virus for fans, administrators and the individuals affected by the postponement of football. See you in a second. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. Obviously a very different tone to Sunday Supplement this week, bearing in mind it's not so much the football we're talking about, it's the issues surrounding the coronavirus, the postponement initially until April the 3rd in this country. Rob Harris, how likely do you think football is going to resume in this country at elite level on April the 3rd and 4th?
I think that's very much a holding date at this point, a placeholder as they continue talks. It was only on Thursday night at 9:30 the Premier League still thought they could go ahead with the fixture programme this weekend. 45 minutes later, Arsenal announced Mikel Arteta's positive test. That then triggered the emergency meeting on Friday morning of the Premier League clubs, which decided to put football on hold in conjunction with the FA and others. So next week we have some key meetings. On Tuesday, UEFA are holding a teleconference with the leagues, the clubs and their own executives. From that, we'll get a clear indication of where they believe football is headed in the next few months, potential solutions, when they can outline options for the Champions League, the Euros and other tournaments. The Premier League then are holding another meeting on Thursday, which from that we'll get a clearer indication from then, it's expected, over what they anticipate the coming weeks and months to look like. But I think April, the first week of April, it looks highly optimistic to be very unlikely. I think there's nothing that indicates now that football will be able to resume in just a few weeks' time. Everything we're being told by the government, by the experts, is this is a situation only escalating, and I don't think there's any clear date now that we will see the return of football. What we're waiting for perhaps is when the National League announces whether they're going to continue, because obviously as of last weekend, this weekend, they're still playing, and that will probably change when the government are expected to announce a ban on mass gatherings over 500 people, which will have a knock-on effect not just for football but other sports and various social gatherings.
Yeah, various non-league managers fuming about it. Ben Strevens of Eastleigh saying the only reason these games went ahead yesterday because of money. You know, the National League care about money, in his opinion. Alan Devonshire, West Ham great, of course, absolutely fuming, saying, what if I got the virus today and then I go and see my 88-year-old mum? How can I live with myself? Or how can they live with themselves? It is an absolute minefield as to where things go from here. I've spoken to various people, same as Rob, who are in meetings, who've been party to these kind of talks. Nobody seems to be able to really believe genuinely that April 3rd and 4th is when football's going to resume. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's pretty impossible to resume on April the 3rd, but it was sensible to give themselves time, that breathing space, that to allow to take stock. I think that obviously the Premier League did the right thing. I think they acted a bit too late, but they did the right thing in going against government advice, if you like, because the advice was still, Cheltenham races still went on. The advice was still to continue, but they did the right thing, and they've given themselves time, and there is time, because the Euros will be cancelled. That's pretty clear.
Does everyone here think that? You all think the Euros are going to be postponed at least for a year? No one believes it's going to go ahead this year. I mean, there are stories in the paper today it could happen later on this year. Is that feasible?
I think it's more likely to be next year, next summer, and that gives space then, because I mean, really, it's obviously very fluid. It moves very quickly, but you would imagine that would then give time for, if games are ever going to be played, if the competition is going to be finished, it could be finished by the end of June, and therefore you wouldn't have to start playing again until May. Now that could coincide apparently with the peak of the problem, but at the same time it allows clubs to get the virus clear of their players, and then you could play behind closed doors. Now, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying that that's one possibility. And I think if it does get played, that's how it will be. It will be behind closed doors later, when clubs are confident that they have measures in place to stop the spread amongst their own staff and certainly amongst their own players. So
Premier League clubs can afford to play behind closed doors. What about the lower league? What about the Coventries or the Scunthorpes and the Grimsbys and what have you, who need the matchday income? Otherwise you could have tens of clubs going to the wall potentially, couldn't you, unless they manage to get some kind of bridging loans to keep them going for a certain period of time, which perhaps is where the government might need to step in.
Yeah, it all feeds in. So I think UEFA have a duty. If you take away the coronavirus, the medical science of it, they have a duty to postpone Euro 2020 so that all domestic leagues can finish what they need to finish, so everyone knows where they stand for the new season, because that's the lifeblood of football. There's no point having a grand tournament if all the players and fans that feed into that don't know where they stand. Equally, because these are exceptional times, I think the big-moneyed Premier League, for example, they have enough cash to make sure they can sort out a plan so that the lower division clubs do not go out of business. if they want to term it as a loan, so eventually it's paid back, so be it. That's just the minute detail of it. There's enough money sloshing around at the elite level of the game to ensure, in these exceptional times, where normal economics do not apply, that they reassure the smaller clubs that they will make sure they do not go out of business. Because eventually it will hit them. It might be 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, but it will hit them if grassroots football and smaller clubs just cannot exist anymore.
It's in nobody's interest for that to happen.
No,
but will they do it? Will they be prepared to put aside some cash and support the lower league clubs?
But I mean, I agree with Ali. I wrote exactly that in the week. It's not the same. There was a resistance to the Premier League helping Bury, for instance, and I can understand that because Bury was a basket case financially, and you can't just have a situation where you swoop in and rescue that club at the expense of other clubs who have run their business far better. So that is unfair. This is a completely unprecedented situation. There is without doubt money within the European game, within our game, that could set up a fund that helps clubs through hardship, because there are going to be plenty of very, very well-run clubs that are going to struggle. And whilst I appreciate what all the guys are saying from the National League or whatever, without a doubt, one of the motivations for the National League will have been money, but it won't have been money for the National League itself. It will have been money for those clubs, because your first most vulnerable clubs are going to be clubs at that level. You know, if you've got no gate money, you're toast in the National League, because they're not getting the sponsorships, they're not getting anything else. So I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I can understand why clubs at that level, why the league at that level, why they've tried to keep it going, why they've tried to keep it going. Because government advice is not shut your doors at the moment. It isn't. The Premier League have taken that step and the EFL followed for obvious reasons. But it's a hugely perilous situation for hundreds of clubs.
And you've got a piece by Gary Lewin in the Mail on Sunday, former England and Arsenal physio, of course, talking about Premier League players will be fine. You know, they've got fitness contraptions in their houses, swimming pools, which must be lovely, mustn't it? But lower league clubs and the players will find it harder to keep fit. One player will get it and the whole squad has to go into self-isolation for a week, which makes then the coming back and playing all these fixtures so difficult, doesn't it? Because one gets it and then they can't play and the fixtures aren't being fulfilled. Do you think the priority is making sure that this Premier League EFL season is completed, whenever that may be, whether it's September, October, November, rather than going for the Karen Brady type method, and she's not alone in thinking it, of just rendering this season null and void?
I actually think we're going to get to a point where the government advice will be you have to stay at home. And this might sound a little crazy, but if people are not going out, they're staying at home, there's a lot of people will actually want to watch sport. So if there's a way of playing games behind closed doors and screening them, then I think that would actually, that could help. And obviously only if it's safe to do that for the players, for the people who would have to be involved, for the TV companies who would have to be involved. But in a sense, that it might be that there's very little that to offer to people other than things like sport. You know, if you're at home, you just watch TV. You know, there's very little else you can do. As I said earlier, in France, all the cinemas are now shut, and that will happen in the UK, etc., etc. So in purely that sense, that's one reason why, if they could find a way to complete the season, it could help. And I think for the integrity of the competition, if there's a way, but you know, that is a big if, because it has to be safe. It has to be. You can't put players at risk. You can't put anybody who's in that stadium, even if it's behind closed doors, at risk. But
if we jump to the part whereby it is deemed to be safe to play and presumably to go and watch, then do you think whenever it happens, even if it takes a year, do you think because people sign up to these rules of this number of games, to avoid legal actions, well, West Brom might do, or if West Brom and Leeds are allowed to go up, what about Fulham? What about Preston, who are pushing for a place in the playoffs?
In my view, you have to finish it. You have to finish it if it's possible, because of all the people say, oh, just void it. That gets rid of all legal action. action, but it doesn't, because if you void it, then there's no promotion. What are Leeds going to do? You know, if you complete the competition, then there's no argument, and there's no legal challenge. But also, people want to see it. Liverpool fans want to see that league finished, because clearly they're champions. They've already won the league. You know, Manchester City would certainly probably lose 2 more games, even if Liverpool lost every game between now and the supposed end of the season. So they should be champions. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But you need to finish the league for them to be champions, and Liverpool fans desperately want that. The only people who don't want it are maybe West Ham fans, who at the moment are just above the relegation zone, and they say stop now, you know. But the reality is that for the integrity of the competition, it needs to be finished.
I mean, it's also an exciting resumption as well, rather than starting again from a standstill position and the sort of slow move into the season. We get back in with, 10 games to go, the titles to be decided, promotion, relegation, and it's a real sort of statement of we're back, and you've got something to watch, because, you know, as we're told to prepare for dystopian dark times where we're socially isolating, we're not going out to workplaces, we're inside potentially, we're seeing loved ones die. You know, people will be desperate for that respite.
Leicester versus Watford.
Yeah.
You say that, they're craving Leicester versus Watford right now.
No.
Even just take their minds off it. I mean, I spoke to a sports psychologist yesterday, Gary Bloom, really interesting character. He's also a football commentator, and he's talking from the human element of things. And you've done a piece as well today about how people, Ali, are filling the void of football. And whilst, of course, it's nowhere near as important as people dying, of course it's not, but there is that other side of it as to how people are actually dealing with the lack of football. But also, from a financial point of view, there are 0 hours contract people who work for clubs. There are, well, journalists will come on to in the very last part, and where sports journalism goes from here. But there are other people involved who aren't getting paid as things stand. And it's a huge mess to sort out for the administrators.
Oh, absolutely. And I think probably the most difficult thing for anybody who's only paid if a match goes ahead is they don't know. You can't plan for how long, you know, who do you borrow off, which family member bails you out, how deep do you dig into your savings account, because you don't know if this is going to be weeks or a month or 3 or 4 months. That's really hard to work out how to do it, because we've never been through this before. When bad things happen to people, they can normally come up with a little plan of action of how they're going to cope. Also, because it's happening to so many people, the solution to it needs to come from quite high up, probably government, I think, need to say anybody whose income has gone from a regular income because they rely on sport to no income at all, there are bailout measures for you. You can't have people wondering how they can feed their kids, can they pay their rent, because sport has been cancelled. And as I said earlier, there is a lot of money in sport, and I'm sure clubs are sitting down right now and working out, A, do they continue to pay the staff who are not doing anything, but also do they pay people that they only see once a week, once a fortnight, who do rely on that income?
I can see that, but it's there are going to be millions of people affected by this. I mean, sport is that much of it. I mean, the airline industry is crashing overnight. The hotel industry is crashing. We've stopped being. Many years ago, we stopped being a manufacturing company, a society, an economy, and became this service industry. All of the service industries are going to go. No one's going to go to restaurants, no one's going to go to hotels, no one's going to go to the cinema, no one's going to go to the theatres, no one's going to need the services that are related to that. If you make an undertaking that we're going to sort 0 hours contracts out, and we're going to, at a government level, well, what are you going to do with the rest of it? Why is sport so special? Go to the West End now and you can walk into any restaurant in the country now and you can get a table for 10. Yeah.
And a lot of these companies are sponsoring sport as well, and ultimately they'll have to take decisions about withdrawing money potentially as well from that sponsorship. Yeah.
Another entity I mentioned is referees, by the way. League One and League Two national list referees don't get paid unless they play. They'll have holidays booked in the summer. It's a large portion for some of them of what they earn. Are they still going to be going on holiday when football resumes? There is so much to consider. But just briefly, before we go to the break, just want to quickly go around the table and check with you, what do you think is the likeliest outcome, both in terms of the end of the domestic season and in terms of the Euros? Because, of course, there's the Women's Euros next summer in this country, which is due to happen. What do you think is going to happen?
It will resume. The Premier League, the football in the UK will resume. Euros will get moved. I actually do believe it will resume at some point. Can't tell you when yet, but I think it will.
So even later in the year, it will resume. Do you believe they'll complete this domestic season, Scotland, England, etc.?
Yeah, they should complete the season. I mean, one of the challenges is European competitions, Champions League, Europa League, whether they find a reconfigured way of getting those games over the line quicker with a changed format. As for the Euros, yes, it's going to be delayed by a year. It has a knock-on effect potentially, from what I gather, for the women's Euros, which could move to 2022 because the logistical challenges of UEFA putting on back-to-back tournaments, and 2022 is a clearer year without a World Cup or Olympics. And yeah, I expect football will resume and hopefully everyone will have something to smile and cheer about again amid all the gloom.
So you're not seeing a winter Euros?
Nothing I'm getting is indicating that, but I think things are very fast moving in terms of, obviously, UEFA has to negotiate with the leagues and clubs to get the desired outcome. There is a gap in the calendar next June 2021 because there was meant to be a new Club World Cup, but FIFA having all sorts of challenges trying to even get the financing and support for the format of that.
Seems an obvious thing to go. Ali, do you see it completing before the
Yeah, it has to. Football will be ruined if it isn't completed. Absolutely ruined, and no one wants that.
OK, as the Liverpool fans told you yesterday when you went to Liverpool, no doubt. OK, and finally, Martin?
It will get completed because you can't bring in an arbitrary way of concluding it halfway through the season. So all the ideas of, oh, we could work this system of playoffs out and stuff, that doesn't, because you can't change the rules of the competition halfway through. So they've got to complete the competition. The only thing you could do if you weren't going to complete the competition is to void the season. There's absolutely no appetite from just about anybody to void the season. No one would want to see that. So it will complete, but when, no one knows.
To when is the big question.
Yeah.
Thank you for now. That's it for part 2. Coming up in part 3, we're going to talk about some football, which did happen this week. Liverpool's Champions League defeat against Atletico Madrid and the manner of it. Back in a second. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement, which has clearly been dominated by the ramifications of the coronavirus. But there was, of course, football played this week, which we're going to discuss now in the company of David Maddock, who has come down from the Northwest for us, from the Mirror, Martin Samuel, Chief Sports Writer of the Mail, Alison Rudd, Sports Writer of the Times, and Rob Harris, Global Sports Correspondent of Associated Press, which is a lovely grand title we've all been giggling about. But you fully deserve it, Rob. You're worth it. You are worth it, my friend. Now, Liverpool. Never mind about the league title for the moment. They are, of course, out of the Champions League. And there was a little bit of discussion about the manner of it, of course, before other events took over. Phil Thomas in The Sun today has a go at Jurgen Klopp's reaction to it. He says, never mind having a pop at Simeone's tactics, the Atletico Madrid manager, who perhaps wasn't as expansive as Jurgen Klopp might have liked. Just accept that his were bang on and yours weren't. That's kind of the nub of what he's saying. Alison Rudd, your thoughts on that?
I do understand why Klopp was cross, because he did it. If you do everything right and it doesn't work out, then you get angry. So when they met in Madrid, Liverpool had lots of possession, but they could not get behind Atletico, who just were a wall, and the fans were amazing. No shots on target. They just couldn't work it out. And I sort of got the impression in the 3-week gap, part of the reason that Liverpool's form in the league and in other competitions dipped was because they were planning how to cope with Simeone's tactics in the second leg at Anfield. And they did. They worked it out. They were creating chance after chance. They were getting behind a very deep defence. They were changing tactics through the game. There was a lot of short passing through the middle and then using the flanks. They were creating chances. Atletico keeper was in amazing form, and they get breakaway goals. And you must, as a manager, afterwards just think, we got it right, and yet it just went so wrong. And of course he's angry. And Klopp did preface it with, I'm a bad loser sometimes. And I think he probably would regret, because he spoke so highly of Simeone when I was in Madrid, certainly. He doesn't really believe they don't play real football. He doesn't believe they did anything wrong. It was the perfect performance from Atletico. But it is tough when you're a manager and you've worked so hard on righting the wrongs and you still go out of a competition.
I would actually dispute that. I can tell you that. I can tell you Jurgen Klopp hates managers who play football like that. So I was going to say I'm not going to name names, but it's obvious that there are certain managers like Jose Mourinho who play football like that, and he hates them. I can tell you that absolutely 100%. I don't think it's a secret. I did an interview with him once, and he said it on record that if he felt he had to play football like that, he would give it up. He would give up the game because he just doesn't believe that that's the right way to play, and he can't believe that people can't find other ways to play. I would agree with exactly what Alison said. Liverpool actually got it right, and all this stuff you just read out there saying Klopp didn't get it right and Simeone did. Simeone didn't. I watched him. I was there at the game. Simeone was on the touchline right in front of me. He was going crazy because he knew his team were getting absolutely destroyed, and they were destroyed. Liverpool had 37 shots on goal, which is normally a Premier League side against a non-league team sort of level. And had they scored 7 or 8, it would have been perfectly justified. You would have said, yeah, they deserve to win by 7 or 8. They scored 2, we're in the lead, and then the keeper just chucked one in. It was the worst mistake you've ever seen. He was absolutely, he was garbage. So, and actually, to be fair, he's been an accident waiting to happen the last few weeks, and I kind of thought if Liverpool were going to go out, it would be because Alisson was injured, and that's the way it proved. And it's sad to say that, and I don't want to criticise him too much, but he was garbage, and that's the reason. Liverpool did plenty enough to win the game, probably plenty enough to win 4 games, and then fate turned against them because the keeper chucked one in.
Yeah, if you're going to have a go at Klopp, I would say have a go at him for not having a better backup keeper.
Well, as it turns out, absolutely, yeah. He did all right early in the season, but he was a bit mixed even then, and I think Klopp kind of knows that perhaps that's been a weakness of Liverpool. Alisson getting injured twice in a season, that's not good, actually.
I mean, particularly knowing how the Champions League final was lost in 2018
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, exactly,
shown how important it was to sign Alisson and to have that backup.
I think you'll find Liverpool will, whenever they do go out and sign players, if it's this summer, they'll go out and sign a keeper. I'm pretty sure about that.
But the focus is obviously on goalkeepers when it goes wrong, but it has not been a good week for some of the big names, for Lloris as well. Obviously, Kepa's going through his problems. Pickford last Sunday. There's a search for goalkeepers in these coming months. You
were at both legs of the Liverpool game. Where do you stand on Klopp's reaction to going out?
There is a reason why the Joker is the character. In all of the sort of graphic world, the Joker as a villain captures the imagination much more so than Batman. There is a reason why Iago is Shakespeare's greatest character who doesn't have the play named after him. And it's been, villains are good. Villains are, Atletico Madrid are unique in European football because they don't care whether you like them. Simeone doesn't care whether you like him or not. He doesn't care whether you like the way he plays or not. They use stuff that people don't. The 2 banks of 4, when people are talking about 2 banks of 4, they usually talk about it being played in a half. They'll play 2 banks of 4 in their own penalty area. The reason I slightly disagree with Dave. I don't think they were going to score 7 or 8. I thought they were about par. I thought 1 in 90 minutes and then 1 in extra time was about them. Because I thought Oatley is the best goalkeeper in Europe and has been for a number of years now. So I'm not surprised he has that storming game at Anfield because I've seen him have games like that before. And when you saw how congested they made that penalty area, I didn't fancy Liverpool scoring for long periods of the game. I thought they had a lot of pressure, Dave, but I didn't fancy them
there were
scoring.
Chances, I mean,
there were chances, yeah, there were chances.
And Andy Robertson missed a header.
Yeah, I missed a header against the bar and
3
stuff.
yards out.
But at the same time,
big chances.
There were, but you look at them and they're 2 banks of 4 in their own penalty area, so they get that second ball first and stuff. And Diego Costa, who didn't have a good game, but he's a wind-up merchant. But they don't care. And I like that because then you've got to beat them. If you're going to win the Champions League, you've got to find a way, or someone's got to find a way of beating this team that play in this certain way. Because if everyone played, you have a go, then we have a go, you have a go, then we have a go, in the end you get fed up with it. I think it's good. I think a little bit of grit in the ointment, and that's what Atletico Madrid are, and you've got to find a way of overcoming that in the same way as you had to find a way of overcoming Stoke if you wanted to win the league, if you had to find a way of overcoming the original Wimbledon teams and stuff, you've got to find a way of overcoming Atletico Madrid. And teams do, because they don't win the Champions League every single year and they don't win the La Liga, so teams do find a way of doing it. Also, they sell their best player every year. One guy leaves Atletico Madrid every single year. It's a feat that he has found this way, negative though it may be, but he has found this way to keep that team competitive whilst selling Griezmann to his main rival, whilst losing his goalkeeper every other year until they've got Oatley. So it's a grudging admiration, but it's an admiration, yeah, and that you've got to find a way around it.
One criticism I've heard this week, Liverpool don't get too much criticism, do they? But in terms of the front three being played so much, and not perhaps having enough quality backup to the front three. Firmino played 42 games, Mane 37, Salah 39. Should there have been stronger backup for those front three so they could have been rested and rotated a little bit more this season?
I don't think it's realistic. I think you'd have backup that was comparable, and so they haven't gone down that path. So when Klopp rotates, he brings in someone like Origi, who's a very different style of player, and you just switch things around. It's unrealistic to expect Liverpool to have another Fab Three who can do the same sort of moves
type for next season.
I think because Liverpool have had a blip, people are looking for reasons and reanalysing what has gone before. I don't think when we come to the end of the season in December that we will look back and think Klopp made too many mistakes with how he's organised his squad.
I would just say as well, Liverpool over the past 2 seasons have lost 2 games in the Premier League. This season they've dropped 5 points all season. They've been in the Champions League final twice and then were very unfortunate to go out. So that is rewriting history. And actually, the game against Barcelona last season, they had 2 of that front 3 out. 2 of them were not playing, and they scored 4 goals against Barcelona. So, the backup is there.
OK. Thank you for now. That's it for this part. When we come back in part 4, we'll be talking about the future of England women and their manager, Phil Neville, after 7 defeats in 11 matches. See you in a second. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. Now, in this part, we're going to talk about England women's football team and, in particular, Phil Neville, the England manager. He's lost 7 of England's last 11 matches, 5 defeats in 7 to lower-ranked nations and 1 win in 9 against sides above them in the world, and that was his first game in charge 2 years ago. Of course, it was a controversial appointment. There are mitigating factors to all of those. Let's have a heated debate about it. Who thinks that that Phil Neville's under pressure? Ali?
Of course he's under pressure, and he's admitted he's under pressure. And usually in football, that's the first sign that you're gone. It's if when you start talking in negative terms about your own job and saying, I understand why people think I shouldn't be here anymore. The problem is he's got the Olympic team that he's in charge of. No one wants to meddle with that. And also the big problem, I think, in the England women's game is who would replace him. Before he was appointed, there was a desire for it to be a top female coach. It felt the right thing to do. And they interviewed everybody, and the top candidates all said, don't fancy the scrutiny I'd be under. Or they said, why would I do that job when I'm building like Emma Hayes would be absolutely perfect. So well respected, and you feel like she's got the talent to take the national team to the next level. And she said, but why would I do that when I'm building something, a team that I see them every day in training? I don't want that type of job. It's just why would anyone do that? So it's all very well talking about Phil Neville being under pressure, but I do not see who would come in to take over. And so it might be we just stick with Phil Neville because he's not appalling. He's struggling to adapt the team and show people how he's taking them forward. Yes, you're right, Jacqui, he's bringing in young players, but I'm not seeing how they're integrating. It's an art, isn't it, when you've got your established, famous names, bringing in youth and making sure they meld. I think he's under pressure, but I think other factors will mean he'll still be there in a year's time, maybe 2.
I think if... this is not to call for his exit anyway, but if he was the men's team manager, I think he might be struggling to continue in the job. Given the absolutely torrid run of form he's had, losing so many games, struggling against some of the big teams in the world. Yes, you're going through that period where you don't have competitive games because England are hosts of Euro 2021, so qualify automatically. So obviously there's always a change in dynamic, and he is using this chance to bring through the young players like Hemp from City, and he's giving a chance in the She Believes. But then when you go through a game like the Spain game and don't get a single shot on target as a team in its entirety, you know, there are questions as well as the questions at the back. 10 goals from his 18 games in charge, conceded from set pieces or crosses, I think it is. And there are questions. Some of his language as well. When we had that third place game at the World Cup, and he basically said it was meaningless, it meant nothing, this game, at the end of it.
Nonsense game.
That language carries through. And then the other day, after losing to Spain, he was talking about a potential reset, questioning his own survivability in the job, almost indicating he might choose to walk away from it. So even he is raising doubts himself, knowing he hasn't perhaps reached the standards he expects himself. He's also started to question the FA a bit around their commitment. You know, we've seen significant funding from the FA across the women's game into back in the Super League, the Championship, to help them as sustainable competitions without necessarily the income coming in at the moment. But Phil Neville also was unhappy with the fact they had to travel not in business class to the States. So he's starting to call things out across the setup. I think the Olympics is the crucial thing. He now has some breathing space. There won't be games in the coming weeks now with football off the cards. And he has that Olympic target. So I think he'll be judged on how he performs with Team GB, which is quite challenging. He can only take 18 players in the squad, and he's going to have to include from across the home nations in that.
Do you see him as being under pressure, Martin?
Problem isn't Phil Neville. Problem isn't Phil Neville. 2015 World Cup. There's a little bit of statistical research.
And your homework.
I've done my homework.
Get to the table.
2015 World Cup. Against Canada, we have a pass completion rate of 46.8%. Blindfolded, 47.6% it would be the average pass rate. Right? We're 23rd out of 24 in pass completion. That's not possession, that's pass completion. Our best in that tournament is 69%. Our average is 61%. Right, so we're a poor passing team. Mark Sampson, it's a long ball team. They bang it into channels. We chase it down. We are better organised. We are better physically, athletically. That is England's strength. But it happened with the men exactly the same way. That was the strength of the England men's team. And what happens over time is everyone catches you up athletically and physically, and everyone gets better organised. And then what comes into it is how well can you play? How well can you pass? How well can you keep possession? How many chances can you create? And if you cannot do that, everyone catches up with you, everyone goes past you. That's what's happened in the last 5 years. So Phil Neville is trying. Phil Neville, the job of Phil Neville or Emma Hayes or any England coach is to get our technical level up so that then the physicality and the organisation of the English game means you beat Spain, means you can beat Holland, means you can beat these countries. At the moment, what has happened is we came third in 2015. It was a really good tournament for us, really, really good tournament, but 23rd out of 24 teams for pass completion. So we weren't a good technical team, we were just a good team. That's what's had to change, and it's really hard to change that because we've got great individuals like Lucy Bronze, who was missing in the States.
One of four starters
was missing. So that doesn't help you. But unless you can get that technical level up, we are going to get overtaken. And that's exactly what happened with the men's team. The same thing will happen all over again, you know, because international football is about technique. And you can only get so far. And the women's game responded to that athleticism 5 years ago. It doesn't so much now. It's evolved technically. It's getting stronger in that level, and we're not keeping pace. And that's the problem. I
think we've seen that with Spain as well. I saw them at the World Cup against Germany, and Spain aren't a big force in the game. They're rising against Germany, one of the leading forces. Technically, they're very proficient, and we're probably seeing them on the rise. I mean, just back to the early point on why perhaps he's under less pressure is probably part of the media industry. The fact there is less focus on the Lionesses at the moment, which probably helps Phil in terms of giving him that breathing space to rebuild and to find those solutions.
Had more attention than they have currently.
And resources as well. I mean, there are two sides to it. I mean, yes, what you say about the players, and Phil Neville would love to have stronger players in reserve wishing to come through. He has brought through some younger players, the likes of Lauren Hemp, who's a fantastic talent who shone at the She Believes Cup, which is an invitational. But he really will be judged on the major tournaments, won't he? And he got to a World Cup semi-final.
He did. And do you know what? I think Phil Neville, I know Phil relatively well because obviously played at Everton, and he himself would say he deserves the scrutiny. He should be judged like the England men's manager. And you're right, he isn't, and that's in part our fault as a media, because we're not giving the scrutiny that it does deserve. I think in mitigation for him, and I'm reluctant to give mitigation because I think he should be criticised because it is his job to take the level up. That is his job.
It's difficult. It's a difficult post.
It is tough, but that's his job, and he has said he wants to do that. He's actually sort of gone on record to say that, and he will accept he should be criticised. But at the same time, he has had this period where there haven't been competitive games, and he has played games without recognised first-team players.
There's no Karen Barsi since the World Cup, no Beth Mead, no Frank Kirby, no Lucy Bronze for the She
Exactly,
Believes.
and there are times if you do take that opportunity to then maybe to sort of experiment, if you like, and certainly try and bring players through and increase the technical level, and maybe play a game where you're just slightly changing the tactics. And I think he is doing that. And I think that in that sense, maybe that is a mitigation. But at the same time, definitely should be criticised because 1 in 8 against sides above them,
1 in 9, yeah.
1 in 9
2 years, yeah.
over 2 years is not good enough. They were at the World Cup. They were. It was a great level. They mixed the technical and the physical.
1 in 11 against teams in the top 8 in the world.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
But the fact is, they were unlucky against the USA, who went on to win it and were the best team in the tournament. They were incredibly unlucky. They matched them in the semi-final, and fractions went against them, and they could have been in the final. So he did a good job there, but since then, absolutely not. And he would accept he should be scrutinised really closely.
That's a positive for the game, isn't it? Sue Smith, that former England winger, makes the point in her article for Yorkshire Post, I believe, that it's just good that this is actually being scrutinised and that the England manager is receiving attention, because when Hope Howe was in charge for 15 years, she probably would have liked a little bit more, and there should have been some more, but that wasn't necessarily the case. In terms of the United States, oh, by the way, there's no appetite for change at all from the FA for now. He'll be judged on Olympics and Euros as and when that happens, and he himself apparently is very much keen to stay in charge. And they've got Dawn Scott, who is the super fitness guru, come back from the United States. All their players idolised her for her attention to detail. She's the very best in the game, and that you would expect to take effect in due course. So a great signing there. But we judged on results. And in terms of the United States, they've had a change at the top after a huge amount of pressure, bearing in mind the legal dispute that's currently going on there, Rob.
Yeah, this has been taking place against the backdrop of the last week of the She Believes Cup. The head of the US Soccer Federation, the president, Carlos Cordero, was forced out. It's all of this long-going pay dispute. Well, you have players here like Tony Duggan who say, look, we don't necessarily warrant that equal pay at the moment because the money isn't there in the game. In the States, obviously, the women's national team is far more successful than the men's. It brings in a lot of money, and they're going through court battles at the moment to get their fair slice of the income. And in those papers, in the court documents that emerged in the last week, the US Soccer Federation basically argued that the men are more basically technically proficient. It's a harder job than the women, which caused outrage. You had sponsors speaking out, and that ultimately the pressure built, and the head of the federation was forced out. Yeah,
they were less skillful. It's an extraordinary statement, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then the Federation president claimed that he wasn't aware fully of the contents of the documents before they were signed off. But this is a really bitter dispute, and we heard those chants at the World Cup final in Lyon of equal pay, and it's really become a thing that the US women's team players have really been talking about, demanding their fair income. It was an unusual thing at the World Cup where they're having to celebrate the World Cup win with the same bosses that they're sort of taking on in court. And the other night before the game, they turned their shirts around to hide the US Soccer Federation logo, just showing those 4 stars to show the 4 World Cup titles. I mean, it's going to be an interesting court case as this goes on. It also again shows the power of sponsors in speaking out. It was Coke who actually were the ones who said basically the language was unacceptable to use, and it was demeaning towards the players who are so successful.
Absolutely staggering. Because if you think about American sport, you actually do think about their women's team and how much admiration you have for their continued success, their strong identity, the way they just you know, bulldoze opposition. You think, wow, they're really, if you're American, you'd be so proud of having that team, and yet what you'd say they're not as skillful as the men's team, who don't do very well in international
Well, they
football.
win World Cups and then don't qualify.
Well,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the women bring in more money and revenue, which is very different, which is why we're not having that debate over here. It's a different situation. But in 2017, the US women earned 37% of the salary of the men, even though they're projected to generate £8 million more. So the stats are there, and it rumbles on, and there'll be a legal hearing very shortly, won't there, as well? Well, in the final part of Sunday Supplement, how will the media cope without sport to cover in the coming weeks? There are fairly serious and not very trivial sides to this particular issue. We'll talk about it when we come back. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. In our final part, we tend to talk about the world of sports journalism and how it's being affected by various issues during the preceding week. Well, this week has been rather a big one in terms of sports news, hasn't it? News in general, but of course, we're here to debate how it affects sport. So the newspapers today are a little bit lighter, still plenty of content in each of them. But of course, we don't have the pullouts at the moment. And as a result, there are a lot of sports journalists who didn't go to football matches yesterday and not going today, therefore are not getting paid, or their work that was in their diary for the next few weeks gone. No kill fee. They're not getting paid as a result. Martin, how do you anticipate the various national and local newspapers covering the void of live sport over the next few weeks?
Well, you down page for starters, that's what you do. You down page in the sports section, you kill the pullouts and everything. But I'm quite hopeful. They're journalists, they're writers. None of us around the table would understand necessarily the guy that is relying on Barry Bolton or someone like that playing on a Tuesday night for the match fee. You know, none of us are at that situation.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about you're not Bolton. I'm not talking about those guys, because that is a very, very real problem. But for national newspapers and for national newspaper journalists, once you're down page, then you've just got to make it. If you've got to make it work, you've got to find interesting things to think, to write about. No one around this table Shakespeare, but Shakespeare wrote in self-isolation during the plague, wrote Macbeth, King Lear and Antony and Cleopatra. So sometimes, not having a mate phoning you up every 10 minutes saying, let's go down the pub, you can actually focus your mind, you know. And so, you know, that's what it's about. It's meant to be a creative profession, and you're meant to be creative people. So that's what you've got to do. You'll have to be creative in the next few months.
So in terms of the staff writers who are on salaries and who are still being paid, so whether they're working from home, that's quite handy. It doesn't matter. You don't need to be in the office necessarily. Do you think we'll see a lot more investigative journalism, which perhaps during the week you don't get a chance to do because every couple of days you've got a match and you've got to travel?
Yeah, you have to adapt. And if that means just hitting the phones, because people can still answer the phone. And I think probably most journalists, if not all of them, have quite a lot of stories rumbling in the background, and you just can't really get your teeth into them because you are dashing off to fly to a match or something more immediate takes over. And some stories just need a lot of time, a lot of phone calls made, a lot of research done, letting it breathe, waiting for the phone call to come back, gently reminding the person who's not sure they want to talk to you, well, I'm free tomorrow, perhaps you feel better about it tomorrow. There will be time now to investigate all those things that you've got, I bet we all have, haven't we, stories that are there in the background. I've got quite a few, but they're just enormous. And you think, well, when am I going to have time to actually reach out to everybody I need to speak to for that story? So Martin's completely right. You shouldn't be in this industry if you're not creative and you can't think of a way around it. I think when readers open the papers, yes, they'll be lighter, but what's put in them won't be just any old rubbish to fill it. It'll be more creative, and stories will be found, because there are thousands of stories out there that don't get any airtime at all because we're all slightly obsessed with the big money industries. So the newspapers will look fine, they will read, maybe they'll read even better because we give everything a bit more, you know, it focuses the brain when you're in extraordinary times. You feel you want to, you don't want to be beaten by it, and you want to make sure you do something better. So it'll be all right in that sense.
Some people might be stockpiling toilet rolls, always trying to keep a stockpile of stories in the works to potentially work on, and features and interviews and things that you can resort to, and issues that often you don't get a chance to look at, because people are not going to want to read and watch discussions of the coronavirus 24/7, particularly when we know there's a clear long-term break from football. There won't be as much to debate in terms of the return. For the next week or so, we've got various meetings.
You've got a week of coronavirus, basically.
Yeah.
You've got a week of coronavirus. You can get by on pieces relating to coronavirus, and then you've got to move on.
And in terms of the season, when it's ending, whether the Olympics are going to take place, which you think aren't going to.
Yeah, I mean, it almost helps the fact we've got these sort of staggered meetings, because it gives something to still to talk about at the moment.
It's a huge story of whether the football season will resume. That's huge, and obviously there are millions of people out there who are actually interested in that, seriously interested as well. I've seen debates on Twitter and stuff, and it's like people are obsessed with it. And obviously, you get the sort of factions, sort of anti-Liverpool fans, for instance, saying let's scrap this season now so they can't win the title, and Liverpool fans saying the opposite. I come back to a point you made at the very start, though, and the sports media is made up, like most of society now, largely moving towards zero-hour contracts, no protections, etc., etc. And those people will be hit, not just in newspapers or all media, everywhere. But everywhere, all of society. And actually, it's a huge danger at this time with this real threat, because when people have no protection, they have to go to work. And if they have to go to work with a virus, they're spreading it. And it's a really interesting phenomena, and a very difficult situation. And, you wonder whether pushing everybody down that road has actually been a really great idea for society. I think it's dangerous, and in the long run, it could lead to a collapse of society.
There is a chance to re-evaluate certain aspects of society, re-evaluate certain aspects of sport, obviously, but to re-evaluate certain aspects of society because of what has happened, and to see certain aspects of society that have grown in the last decade or so, as you say, 0 hours contracts, and the lack of protection that a lot of people have now. And to look at this and think, right, well, this is wrong. We need to stop this. We need to turn away from this.
With economies collapsing, there's a really big argument for universal income now as well. And people are so dead set against that. But you look now, exactly now, and you think, good idea.
I mean, some people do choose for a freelance life, particularly in the world of punditry and commentators and such forth. Obviously, it's at a time like now, there's that uncertainty, which obviously is concerning for them.
But there's there's freelance writers at the top end. The guy who's sitting there waiting to go to Stockport on a Wednesday night or whatever, that's really precarious.
It is a big concern, and the Football Writers Association, which Ali and I both on the national committee of, we saw the various WhatsApps going yesterday about how to protect members who, frankly, are in a very dire situation. Philippe Auclair, the esteemed writer, is fielding a lot of emails on this matter, and they released a press release yesterday asking for stories to get people to explain how it's affecting them. But a lot of people don't have savings particularly behind them, and freelance life is precarious, but literally nobody really saw something like this coming, where the football season, sporting season, could be shelved for several weeks, potentially months. And so they are getting together with the Sports Journalists Association tomorrow, and they're going to be trying to work out a way of trying to help the freelance writers. And there are going to be a lot of people across football in a similar situation, aren't there? But David, I just wanted to check with you in terms of the clicks that the Mirror needs, in terms of the various newspapers need in terms of advertising. How's that going to be affected by the fact you're not going to have sort of VAR, disaster, drama, so-and-so said this at the end of a press conference, so-and-so said that, and we're live from so-and-so press conference? How will that affect you now?
Well, I don't want to be too flippant about it, but I think in terms of a tabloid newspaper, we will revert to our go-to, which is transfer news, because people will assume football will get back underway at some point. And football fans are obsessed with who their team is going to buy, who their team, who's going to go, who's going to. So, and I noticed we flicked through this, you flicked through the Sunday papers, and already there's a lot of transfer stories filling space in those in this weekend's papers, and that will be a go-to, and they will hope that generates those clicks that you say. But obviously we're all dependent on them. All of media is dependent on people actually engaging.
I mean, that's one of the uncertain on transfers. Those players have already agreed to join for next season when the next season resumes. At one point, there's one company, someone from Reach, who's got a thing on their Twitter which is gathering freelance names and details.
Yes,
Yeah.
on the Reach website.
I've retweeted it, so it's on.
OK, well, we wish everybody well, those who are involved in sport, and hopefully we'll be able to continue. Thank you very much to all the guests in the studio. Don't forget, you can catch up with today's show on the podcast and on demand. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week, I think, at 10 o'clock. Bye.